Hey guys, and welcome back to Hunter's Exotics. If you guys remember from last week, I showed off how to make this guy an enclosure for less than $400. If you haven't already seen that video, go check it out, the link's down in the description. But today we're going to be doing an ultimate care guide for the blue-tongued skink. If you have considered owning one of these things, then this is definitely the video for you. In this video, I'm going over every single detail and question you might have about one of these guys. And if you enjoy this video, don't forget to like it, it really helps a lot. And if you learned anything today, comment down below something you didn't know before watching this video. But before we get started, if you guys remember last video, I asked for name suggestions for this little guy. And I had a ton of good suggestions, but one really stood out to me. There was a commenter by the name of Destiny sharing the tragic news of her skink named Sneak passing away from unknown causes. She asked me if I could name this little guy after hers, and without a second thought, I said yes. If you've ever lost a pet, then you know the pain that Destiny is going through. And Destiny, if you see this, please reach out to me and you can have a free Hunter's Exotic shirt on me. Sneak will live on through this little guy. But with all that being said, let's go ahead and get into it. Blue-tongued skinks are capable of living up to 30 years with an average lifespan of 20 years. They are an omnivorous species, meaning they eat both greens and insects, with the best diet consisting of a 60% insect to 40% green ratio. These guys are diurnal, meaning they tend to stay awake for most of the day and sleep throughout most of the night. There are many subspecies of the blue-tongued skink, but today I'm going to be mainly focusing on the Indonesian subspecies. The reason I'm only focusing on the Indonesian subspecies versus the Australian subspecies is simply just because the Australian ones are generally harder to get into the United States with the stricter import laws. Most blue-tongued skinks sold in the United States are from Indonesia. So now that we know the basics about this guy, let's jump into the enclosure requirements. A good rule of thumb for these guys is to never go below 40 gallons. Anywhere from a 40 to 55 gallons seems to be socially acceptable for an adult blue-tongued skink. But keep in mind, reptile information is always changing, and newer research suggests that they should really be kept in a 6x2x2 enclosure. Regardless, if you plan on getting one of these things, make sure you have plenty of room and adequate space to care for one of these things. I guess he's gonna get on my shoulder now. And remember, never house 2 or more blue-tongued skinks in the same enclosure. They can become incredibly territorial, regardless of the sex. Now, let's move on to the lighting. As many of you know, UVB is the type of light that the sun emits. Some studies show that a blue-tongued skink might actually be able to survive for decades without UVB lighting. However, it is very crucial for their vitamin D levels and their overall health. I personally recommend a ZoomEd T5HO. This is a rather slick looking lighting option and can provide some of the best levels of UVB. However, there are so many different options for UVB and many are perfectly fine and acceptable for your skink. The heating of the tank is often referred to as UVA. They require a basking area of around 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And depending on the size of your tank, a 75 watt like I used in my last video is likely all you'll need to achieve those levels. The cool side of the tank should be around 75 degrees with a nighttime temp of 70. And depending on the temperature you keep your house, it may not be necessary to provide a nighttime bulb. There should be plenty of basking areas inside of your enclosure. You can use driftwood, stone, or really anything you can think of. And just be mindful of any plastic decorations directly underneath the heat bulb. Most terrarium decorations are not only safe but completely rated for those temperatures, but if you're ever unsure, it's not worth the risk. And this goes without saying, but never provide an artificial basking area for your lizard. Those little heated rocks and stuff that you see in pet stores all the time can severely burn your skink, and it could possibly even cook it, so we're just going to completely avoid those. And as I stated in my last video, most substrate you use is going to be completely fine in your skink's enclosure. I love reptile myself, so I tend to use that more often than not. But you can use sphagnum moss, coconut fiber, or even plain topsoil. Just make sure to never use sand in your enclosure unless it's mixed in with the current substrate pretty thoroughly. This can cause impaction and can lead to very severe problems in your skink's health. The idea of the substrate I mentioned before is mainly to hold humidity, which should be around 60 or 65% for most subspecies. And if you're completely new to the hobby, make sure you pick up a hydrometer when you're out. That way you can monitor the humidity at all times. Lastly, while we're on the topic of substrate, a bioactive enclosure might be more up your alley. These are basically self-cleaning, self-maintaining, awesome enclosures. And I usually build bioactive enclosures for all of my reptiles. And if you want to see one, I actually have a video up on my channel building one for my black widow. And don't worry, I know it's a spider, but the same concept applies for reptiles too, just at a much larger scale. Just always make sure there's a drainage layer and provide the appropriate species of isopods and springtails. Feeding your skink is actually surprisingly easy as they can eat almost anything. Some people even report that they eat dog food out in the wild that they just find at random houses. Not saying you should do that, but I just thought that was interesting. I usually feed my skink dubia roaches as I breed them and I have several thousand at any given point. But you can feed them earthworms, superworms, grasshoppers, really any insect you can think of. For vegetables, you can feed mustard greens, collard greens, turnip greens, squash, carrot. There's so many different options out there. Depending on the age of your skink, they should be fed at least 2 to 7 times a week. Once they are adults over the age of 8 months, they should be fed twice a week with a 60% insect to 40% green ratio. So with all of that being said, I think that gives you all the information you need about actually housing and the husbandry of one of these animals. Now we're going to talk about the handling. So as with all reptiles, once you get one of these things, leave it alone for a few days. Most skinks are incredibly smart and very easy to handle and also friendly, but you should still always give your reptile enough time before you handle it. An easy way to start handling one without actually holding it yet is just gently petting its neck. It's a good way to start, and that's how you pet it. I actually very rarely see these guys aggressive or even defensive, but if you do, the best way to break that habit is by hand feeding. It might be in your best interest to hold some greens out in front of him to see if he'll take, and that's a good way to get familiar with your hand. They're pretty curious and adventurous reptiles. As you can see, they kind of just walk around, chill out. It's very similar to a bearded dragon, if I must say. But they're way cooler, by the way. I mean, look at this guy, he's massive. So now the question is, should you get one? Well, I don't know. These guys are very expensive. Not only are they expensive right off the bat, they're also very expensive to maintain. They're very low maintenance once you set up the enclosure, but that initial setup is going to cost you close to $500 to $1,000. They make awesome pets and they eat pretty well. They're generally very docile and would make a pretty good pet for a beginner. I think the real big downside on this is if you have an appropriate space for these. Realistically, they need the size of like a small closet. So I guess as long as you have something like that in your house, then you should be good. And I just want to clarify, not in height, but in length. You are dirty. I just now realized that. He's got dirt all on his face. I think these are probably one of the best pet reptiles. Myself, personally, I love these guys. I think if you were thinking about pulling the trigger and you haven't already, I think just go ahead and pull it. If you have the money, if you have the space, and if you have the appropriate husbandry, then I think you just go for it. I love this guy. I've woken up every single day and handled him, and he's become extremely friendly with me and curious. As you could see, he was crawling all over me. I think you should get one. So I guess we're gonna go ahead and wrap this video up now. By the way, I just wanted to say, just real quick, just to throw it in here, I guess, I'm now selling shirts. You could have a Hunter's Exotic shirt just like me. Hold on, let me show you the back. It's even cooler. The back is awesome too. It would really help me out in funding new videos and maybe even cooler ideas for this guy. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more of my videos. He will really thank you, and you're awesome, guys. Thank you so much.